The December night in Minnesota was mercilessly cold. The temperature dropped well below zero, and rare snowflakes flickering in the headlights slowly settled on the icy road. James Elliott, a 43-year-old engineer, was returning home late, having been delayed at work due to a sudden technical problem that threatened to disrupt an important project. Tired and exhausted, he dreamed only of a hot shower and his bed to forget about a busy day. Highway 61, which connects the industrial area with the suburbs where James had a small but cozy house, was practically empty at this hour. His dark blue sedan was the only moving object on this stretch of road, cutting through the darkness with headlights and leaving clouds of steam from the exhaust pipe. The radio was playing an old jazz song softly, helping James stay awake at the wheel, and the heater was on full blast, creating the illusion of comfort. Suddenly, James noticed movement on the side of the road in his peripheral vision. At first, he thought it might be a deer or another animal that often goes out to the roads in search of food. But when he looked closer, his heart skipped a beat. A little girl stood at the edge of the road, shivering from the cold. She was no more than 7 years old, wearing only a thin blue dress and light shoes, completely unsuitable for the winter weather. The girl's blonde hair fluttered in the wind, and her big eyes seemed to glow with amber light in the rays of his headlights. James braked sharply. The car skidded slightly on the slippery road. His first thought was one of utter bewilderment. What is a child doing alone on a deserted road at 1 o'clock in the morning in a 30-degree frost? He was filled with anxiety and worry, mixed with disbelief. Turning off the engine, he jumped out of the car, instantly feeling the cold penetrating even through his thick winter jacket. As James approached the girl, he was even more surprised. Despite the cold and light clothes, she didn't look frozen. Her cheeks were not flushed from the cold, and there was no frost on her eyelashes, which would certainly form at such temperatures. Moreover, she stood perfectly still, not shaking, as one would expect from a freezing child. The cold seemed to have absolutely no effect on her, which contradicted all the laws of physics and common sense. James, a father of 2, instinctively took off his jacket to wrap the girl up, but she took a step back, as if not wanting his help. Her eyes, an unusual amber color, stared straight at him, but they were strangely empty, as if she were looking through him. At that moment, James felt an inexplicable chill down his spine that had nothing to do with the winter chill. Out of a professional habit of analyzing situations, James quickly looked around. No sign of other people or vehicles. The nearest houses were several miles away, and the child couldn't just leave the house and wander that far on his own, especially in this weather. There was no logical explanation for this. Overcoming a growing sense of anxiety, James decided that it was necessary to immediately take the girl to a safe place and contact the police. Perhaps her parents are looking for her. Perhaps some kind of misfortune has happened. He tried to gently take her hand, but at the same moment, the girl suddenly spoke. Her voice, surprisingly melodious for a child her age, rang out clearly in the silence of the night, telling a story that froze James's blood in his veins. She called herself Abigail Mason and said that 30 years ago, almost every day, she was driving in a car with her parents along the same road. It was the same cold December night when their car lost control on an icy road and crashed into a tree. Her parents died instantly, and she, thrown out of the car by the force of the impact, froze trying to get to help. Since then, her ghost has appeared here every year on the anniversary of the tragedy, unable to find peace. James froze, unable to believe his ears. It sounded like a plot from a cheap horror movie, but something in the girl's eyes, in her voice, in the very atmosphere of the moment made him believe every word. He remembered that he had heard this story from local residents a long time ago. about the ghost of a little girl who sometimes appears on the Highway 61, but he always considered it an ordinary urban legend. The next moment, Abigail asked him for help. She wanted James to find her remains, which were never found by rescuers, and bury them next to her parents in the local cemetery. Only then can she find peace. She pointed to a small wooded area near the road where, according to her, she died that tragic night. James, who had been a rational man all his life, believing only in what could be explained by science, found himself at a crossroads. Common sense told him that it was all a hallucination caused by fatigue, stress, or perhaps incipient hypothermia. But another part of his being, that intuitive component that he had always suppressed, screamed that this was real, that little Abigail was real, and that she really needed his help. Overcoming an internal conflict, James agreed to help. He got into the car, and the girl, like a disembodied spirit, appeared in the passenger seat. She guided him, pointing the way through the snowy forest. They stopped in a small clearing, where the remains of an old wrecked car could be seen among the trees, half swallowed up by the forest over decades of neglect. Under Abigail's guidance, using a flashlight from the trunk of his car, James began to dig up the snow near the wrecked car. The work was hard, his hands were frozen, and the light of the flashlight gave only limited visibility. But in a strange way, he felt that this was the right thing to do, that this was what he had to do. After an hour of exhausting effort, the shovel hit something hard. James removed the remaining snow with his hands and discovered a small skeleton, almost completely preserved, dressed in the remains of a blue dress. Abigail, watching him work, seemed to become more transparent by the minute, as if her presence in this world was weakening. When James looked up to ask what to do next, he saw only a faint glow where she was standing, and the next moment, it completely disappeared. Left alone in the silence of the winter forest, James realized that his life would never be the same again. This meeting turned his whole worldview upside down, forced him to reconsider everything he believed in or did not believe in. With awe and respect, he wrapped the remains of little Abigail in his jacket and carefully carried them to the car. The next day, James contacted the police, telling them everything that had happened, but keeping silent about the supernatural nature of his discovery. The police launched an investigation, and soon the identity of the remains found was established. Indeed, it was Abigail Mason, a 7-year-old girl who went missing 30 years ago with her parents after a car accident. The remains of her parents were found and buried immediately after the tragedy. But Abigail's body was never found, and the case remained unsolved all these years. The news of the discovery spread quickly through the small town, and many residents, especially old-timers, recalled stories about the ghost of a little girl on Highway 61. Some even claimed to have seen her, but no one ever dared to follow her or help her, considering it to be just a figment of the imagination or an urban legend. James became a local celebrity, although he never aspired to such fame. Many journalists tried to interview him, but he refused, wanting to keep his story a secret. The only thing he did publicly was attend Abigail's funeral when her remains were finally buried next to her parents at the local cemetery. On the day of the funeral, the weather was surprisingly mild for December. The sun was breaking through the clouds, and suddenly a lot of people gathered at the cemetery. Not only the curious, but also those who remembered the Mason family, remembered the little blonde girl with amber eyes. Among those present, James noticed an elderly woman who was standing a little apart from the others. After the ceremony, she approached him and introduced herself as Aunt Abigail, her mother's sister. She said that all these years she had never stopped hoping that one day her niece would be found and laid to rest next to her parents. James did not tell her about the supernatural encounter, deciding that some secrets are better kept in the heart. Instead, He just said that he was happy that he was able to help end this sad story and bring peace to the family. The woman hugged him tightly with tears of gratitude in her eyes. After the funeral, James's life changed. He became more sensitive to others, more open to possibilities beyond his previous rational worldview. He began volunteering at a local orphanage for bereaved children, trying to make their lives a little brighter. He often thought about Abigail, about her lost life, about how she could have grown up if fate had not ordered otherwise. A year later, on a cold December night, James found himself back on Highway 61, returning home after visiting Abigail's grave, which he has visited regularly since. The snow was falling slowly, covering the road with a white blanket, reminding him of that fateful night. Suddenly, a bright glow on the side of the road caught his attention. After stopping the car, James got out and saw the silhouette of a little girl, but this time she was not alone. A man and a woman stood next to her, holding her hands. The Mason family reunited in eternity. Abigail smiled at James, her amber eyes glowing with warmth and gratitude, and then the three of them slowly disappeared into thin air, leaving behind only a slight glow, which also soon disappeared.